Hi, my name is Jumpy Bernard here on Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR.
Roll Tide and welcome to this Thursday edition of Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR. This is Roger Hoover. Great to be with you in our first week in August as preseason camp is fully underway in Tuscaloosa for the 2025 Alabama football team. We'll be talking football, even let you see some practice coming up on the show today as we take a look at what's coming up on the show, plus our headlines. Our headlines always presented by RJ Young. RJ Young is the official technology solutions provider of Crimson Drive. Let's see what's coming up on the show this afternoon. First of all, we will take you outside to the Thomas Drew practice fields and let you see some highlights from fall camp so far for the Crimson Tide with the footage courtesy of the University of Alabama. Then we'll talk about Alabama fall practice with Colin, who covers Crimson Tide football for the Tuscaloosa News. Not just thoughts on camp, the quarterback competition, some thoughts on Ty Simpson, but really some good thoughts as well on Colin and the way he is recruiting in his second year as the leader of the Crimson Tide. Then we'll let you hear from the coordinators for Alabama, the offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, as well as the defensive coordinator Kane Womack, get their thoughts as they met with the media earlier this week on Alabama football and preseason camp that is fully underway. Speaking of the Crimson Tide football team, on Monday they held Media Day as part of preseason camp, and back this week on the practice field during some of the hot days here in Tuscaloosa. Make sure you check out as well RolledTide.com to continue seeing Crimson Tide players being added to various award watch lists like Jeremy Bernard, Ryan Williams named to the Bolitnikoff Award watch list for the best wide receiver in the country, Jam Miller, best running back in the country watch list as well. So all these different watch lists coming out at this time of the year. RolledTide.com has the very latest on those Crimson Tide players really receiving some good national recognition. Now, coming up this Saturday, a very important scrimmage. It'll be scrimmage number 1 for the Crimson Tide coming up at Saban Field. We'll talk about that coming up on next week's edition of Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR. The other headlines around Crimson Tide athletics really revolve around basketball for both men's and women's basketball. The SEC schedules have been released, so we now know the full schedules for both Alabama men's and women's basketball. We've talked before during the summer about the non-conference schedules being out. Now we know the full schedules being released as well by the Alabama men's and women's basketball teams. Also, a great note in basketball, Erwin Dudley has been promoted after being a graduate assistant in the last couple of years. Great former player for the Crimson Tide, and now he is a full-time member of Nate Oates' staff as he will be a special assistant coach, a special assistant to the head coach. So again, part of the coaching staff. He's been around the last 2 years. Really doing great work as a graduate assistant and working with this program, but now directly working with Nate Oates in a great role for Erwin Dudley, one of the best to ever suit up in the crimson and white. We do have some soccer results to talk about. The Alabama soccer team, a 2-2 draw earlier this week against Clemson, and coming up tomorrow, they'll be traveling to Tallahassee to take on Florida State, and once again, exhibition matchups for Wes Hart and the Crimson Tide. Their season will start a week from tonight. First home game is going to be coming up on August 17th in Tuscaloosa against Chattanooga. So everything with soccer really right around the corner. We're going to talk about soccer coming up on next week's show as well to get you fully ready for Alabama soccer that's getting ready to start, as well as volleyball the week after that. So best of luck to Wes Hart and the Crimson Tide, especially taking on an ACC power. Florida State coming up in an exhibition. Make sure you follow Alabama soccer on social media for the latest updates coming up from Tallahassee tomorrow. Tallahassee, of course, is the goal at the end of the month for the Alabama football team. August 30th, 2:30 start time down at Tallahassee, and we will be there, of course, with our radio coverage starting 3 hours prior to kickoff. But right now, all the coverage is on the practice fields, the Thomas Drew practice fields on campus at the University of Alabama. Thanks to the University of Alabama, we have a look at preseason practice for the Crimson Tide as we watch some of the highlights from this week in full pads workouts for Alabama on the practice fields. Always fun to see that footage from the University of Alabama looking at preseason practice for the Crimson Tide. You got to see some of the work on the offensive, the defensive line, some of the secondary, of course, the wide receivers, and of course, the quarterbacks. We're going to talk about the quarterback competition coming up with our next guest, Colin Gay. He covers Alabama football for the Tuscaloosa News. Also did a deep dive earlier this season on Ty Simpson, so we'll talk about that, plus Kalen DeBoer and his recruiting efforts here in year two as the leader of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Here's our one-on-one conversation with Colin Gay. Colin, it's great to see you as we're in the first full week of August, and certainly a lot to talk about with the Alabama Crimson Tide. How's everything been going for you as you've gathered info from Media Day and all the practices, all the availability we've had over the last few days?
It's been a whirlwind, man. Plenty of conversations, plenty of talking with Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Grubb, Kane Womack over these past few days, players, and we're just kind of trying to glean all the information that we can out of these, practice sessions that we get, and just trying to see what this team looks like.
As we said this week, again, first week of August, just how would you describe the overall mood around this football team as they enter in this portion of fall camp?
I think it's one of confidence. I think it's one of this is a team that, there's a lot more conversation about the first year of DeBoer, actually, more than I expected. One where they're saying the last year was unacceptable and that everybody who we have on this roster wants to be here. They know the expectation of what Kalen DeBoer wants to build at Alabama. So I think it's one of confidence, it's one of comfort, and it's one of excitement. Kalen DeBoer and the players, they talk about how, with Ryan Grubb, even though he's new and Jason Jones is new on staff as well, it's one of, a level of comfort. It's one of, stability they talk about and how a lot of the pieces, they knew one another from previous stops and they knew each other from last year. So it's almost kind of like the band coming back together for one run. Through that familiarity, through that confidence, I mean, there's high expectations stemming from that program for sure.
In the media availabilities to watch practice in person, kind of where have your eyes kind of taken you? What's been your focus on when you've been out there the last few days?
I think quarterbacks, man. I think that's been a lot of people's focus here the last few days, where it's seeing what Ty Simpson looks like, what Austin Mack, what Keelan Russell kind of look like. I mean, we haven't been able to see a lot, right? Just a lot of running backs work, a lot of tight ends, and maybe a little bit of wide receivers. But I mean, just to see when Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer talk about consistency on offense, when they talk about how they want a guy who's going to make, the safe play, the guy who may be as, I don't know, like have that level of bring that stability to the offense that may not be the most flashy. It may not be the most like downfield, exciting, rah-rah, but it's the one that's going to consistently move the ball downfield and get balls to receivers like Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton. Like that's what they're talking about is if you give those receivers a chance, they're going to make a play. That's just how talented they are. So I think that's been where my eyes are focused is, okay, which quarterback provides that best opportunity for Alabama? And I think, I mean, I can't speak for them, but I think Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer are trying to think the same thing at this point.
Any other checkpoints along the way in terms of the quarterback competition leading up to game week?
I think Ty Simpson, if you were to ask Ryan Grubb and you were to ask Kalen DeBoer, I think they didn't hide in spring that if he were to start a game for Alabama the day after the spring game, Ty Simpson was going to be the starter. And asking Ryan Grubb immediately after the first day of practice, he said Ty Simpson is still in that mode. He is still the guy if they were to start a game tomorrow. Now Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb are just looking for him to earn the job. Over the course of a slew of practices, scrimmage coming up Saturday, scrimmage coming up the next Saturday as well. So I think Ty Simpson is the favorite, and I don't think that's anything crazy to say. But, even just talking with Kalen DeBoer, I grabbed him, or I talked to him about Austin Mack for a couple minutes, and he told me he wants the competition of this whole thing too, because competition brings up guys like Austin Mack, like Keelan Russell, and makes them better and kind of improves, like gives them something to work for and to strive for. And through that, you can see the growth over the course of, the competition and the head to head. So I think, Ty Simpson is kind of the front runner and should be the front runner, being, 4 years into his career at Alabama. But, that's not stopping Alabama from saying, no, this is a quarterback battle. We want to see what Austin Mack and Keelan Russell have got, even if it's just planning ahead for the future.
Speaking of Ty Simpson, and going back to January, you had a great in-depth profile of Ty Simpson. What'd you really enjoy learning the most about him, especially with his upbringing around his dad, who was around the game as well, continues to be the head coach of UT Martin?
Yeah, I think how much of a football guy Ty Simpson is. Well, my first favorite thing is how, when he was younger, his dad and his family grew up Ty Simpson grew up very, very close to the UT Martin campus. And his dad would let him, before he got his license, wake up at 5 a.m. and take the family van to campus without a license, just because the dad didn't want to get up that early. So just so that Ty Simpson can come in and work on his craft, and he's driven from an early age. He's always soaked in information and learned from his coaches, learned from his dad, been around quarterbacks at UT Martin that kind of, it's a different level, but it's kind of taught him, okay, this is what it takes to be a pro. This is what it takes to be a college athlete. And Ty Simpson kind of took that and ran with it and continued that learning from Bryce Young, continued that learning from Jalen Milroe. And from there, it seems like, from the outside looking in, that Ty Simpson is kind of, all of that knowledge and all of that kind of leadership that he's soaked in has kind of started to spill out on the rest of this roster. And it's turned into, every receiver that I've talked to, every coach that I've talked to is talking about this confident, this Ty Simpson with swagger that Alabama fans should be expected to see this fall, because of all this stuff that's been soaking in. It's almost about to pour out in front of Alabama fans this fall. So I think that's the big thing, is him just soaking in all this information, becoming a 5-star, but a 5-star with something to prove as well. So I think just seeing his path, seeing how much football knowledge he has, which kind of makes, where he's at and kind of where he stands, makes sense.
Going to the other side of the ball, what have you enjoyed learning about this Crimson Tide defense? What stands out to you anytime you have seen them on the practice field?
Yeah, I think a lot of my focus has been on the defensive line and just pass rushers in general. Talking with LT Overton, Freddie Roach, there's been a lot of conversation about turning, potential or pressures into production, sacks, tackles for loss, because you didn't see a lot of that if you're an Alabama football fan, you didn't see a lot of those finishing moves from guys last year. And a lot of that is just, body control, technique, but it's also just effort and force on the line of scrimmage, because you saw LT Overton, be a step away, or Tim Keenan a step away from from quarterbacks all off season or all last season. And I talked to Freddie Roach about that at media day, and he was talking about how it's literally just, a step or two. It's footwork, it's speed, it's getting around the tackle, and just taking advantage of every opportunity that you have, right? So that's what I'm looking at it, because I think that's the difference in Alabama's defense in 2025 is you have a defense that's returning a stacked defensive backs room, one that's overflowing with talent, especially at corner. Going to continue that ball hawk mentality. What can change with Alabama if they have a defense that has consistent tackles for loss, that has consistent sacks, that are consistently in the backfield and forcing quarterbacks to throw much quicker than they want to? I think that heightens everything else on this defense. So defensive line and pass rushing in general, I'll bring the Wolf linebackers into it too. That's going to be the difference in what this defense can do in 2025.
Then really, either side of the ball or in special teams, any key position battles that really have to be determined before getting ready for Florida State, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think you mentioned special teams. I think that's the one that's going to be the main one that fans may not think about, but it's the one that could be the big one heading into fall, between Alex Bruhoff, the freshman out of California, and Blake Dowd, Colorado School of Mines punter. From what I was told, Blake Dowd is in the lead at this point. But I mean, Alex Bruhoff's coming off of injury. They have high expectations for him heading into the fall and just throughout his career at Alabama. But I think that's Kalen DeBoer's been clear. Nobody's going to replace James Burnip. James Burnip was a man amongst boys in the punting profession, and it'll be interesting to see what that kind of difference looks like come game day. But and how much, Alabama fans could be taking for granted what they had in James Burnup and the weapon that he was for Alabama. So seeing anybody else back in that backfield and will be interesting to see come fall just how much of a difference that is. But you also mentioned left guard, which is another position that is pretty big for Alabama. Replacing a huge presence in Tyler Booker. Looks like it's going to be Gino Vandermark. Cam Dewberry is also taking reps at left guard. Gino Vandermark, a little bit of an interesting situation just because of his versatility. They've been repping him at right guard. He's their backup center as well. So if Gino wins that left guard job officially, that doesn't mean he's not going to play center. That doesn't mean he's not going to play right guard if Jaden Roberts gets nicked up or Parker Brailsford. So it's interesting because even with this position battle, which every offensive lineman you talk to, whether it's Caden Proctor, whether it's Jaden Roberts, like these guys believe that Alabama has a Joe Moore award-winning offense, the best offensive line in the country. And that's what they strive to be. And, that's the expectation from inside the building too. And, that could be the difference, especially with a new quarterback behind center. That could be the difference between the offense that Alabama wants and the offense that Alabama is striving for.
So that's a good look at everything in the preseason camp for the Crimson Tide, getting ready for Alabama against Florida State. But for you, you've also kind of taken a deep dive into Alabama's recruiting efforts, especially here in the state of Alabama. An article published recently in Tuscaloosa News, TuscaloosaNews.com. What'd you learn in your reporting about how Kalen DeBoer has approached specifically in-state recruiting, maybe year one versus year two?
Yeah, I think it goes back to even when DeBoer first took the job, right? That time when he was, going around the country introducing himself officially as the heir to Nick Saban, and that the hours that he spent at different high schools around the state, kind of introducing himself, getting to know the history, getting to know the players that have come from buildings. And he told me in another story that was published recently, he told me that he really didn't have a mindset going in on what it took to win the state of Alabama on the recruiting trail. That's not something that, Nick Saban left in like the desk drawer, right? It was something that he took personal experience, personal wins from his time at Washington, and the relationships he built out on the West Coast and applied them to Alabama. And you saw somebody who relationships took the forefront, getting to know the prospects, getting to know their families, getting to know their high school coaches, pitching Alabama in the same way Nick Saban did, that Alabama is still Alabama. It's a program that I was just talking to a coach today about. Alabama is even without Nick Saban, it's a program that still pushes out NFL type talent. It's still a program that if you are successful there, you can play anywhere in the NFL. You can be a first round pick. And that's not something that every program can say, no matter who's in charge. So I think Kalen DeBoer, I think it did take a little bit on the recruiting trail to kind of learn the state. He did have to focus on retention right when he got there, securing the likes of Jalen Mbakwe, securing the likes of Ryan Williams. So that's why that in-state class in 2025 may not look the shiniest, for lack of a better term, but talking to kids across the state in 2026, they are just very, very bought in to bringing Alabama, the Crimson Tide, back to that top spot on the recruiting trail in state. And it's not about, NIL is a part of it, right? NIL is always a part of it on the recruiting trail now, but it's this pride. EJ Crowell, the running back from Jackson, grew up an Alabama fan. He was recruited by Nick Saban, and he still buys into the fact that Alabama can be Alabama with somebody else in charge other than Nick Saban.
Really fascinating work. Again, I encourage all Alabama fans to check it out to learn a little more about the recruiting side, plus everything going on right now as we get ready for August 30th and Alabama against Florida State. Colin, thank you so much for the time you've given us here on the Crimson Tide Sports Network. All the best as we get ready for kickoff, but thank you again for your time.
Thanks for having me, Roger.
We've heard plenty from Colin DeBoer to start preseason camp for the Crimson Tide. Now it's time to hear from the coordinators for Alabama football. First, you'll hear from offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, giving the latest on the quarterback competition, as well as just some other thoughts he's had, specifically about running back Jam Miller. And then you'll hear from defensive coordinator Kane Womack. He has a fun comments coming up on Quay Russaw coming up in our coordinators checklist, part of our typical coaches checklist that we have on Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR.
Right now, we're keeping status quo. All the guys have been getting 1s, 2s, and 3s, with the exception of Ty. He's the only guy that's not taking any 3 reps. So really, it's been status quo. But today, everybody got a couple racks with the 1s, and Ty took a couple with the 2s. So we're still moving them around, and the guys know that. There's a pretty clean picture moving forward throughout the week. Jam Miller, he's the man. Love that guy. So Jam's been doing everything. I think, the thing about a guy like Jam, you love older guys that don't feel like their skill set's complete. And what I mean by that is I think Jam really wholeheartedly takes on, like, there's things that I can get better at. And he works at them extremely hard. He's very diligent about his process. And so he's a good leader in the room. I think Daniel has showed the physicality we thought, with exceptional hands. I think Dre's getting better at pass protection, as is Rich. And so those 4 guys have really shown a lot of growth. And then even A.K. Deere is a guy that, was really swimming this spring and has showed some promise here lately. Normally I don't talk about those younger guys too much, but just been proud of, his progress the last couple of days has been really good. Man, I'm honestly really excited about the way the old line's playing, the physicality that they've been showing, and the leadership that Parker's been able to have. And then KP, I think, is really it's been so fun to coach him. He's a hungry guy that he obviously is a super talented player and God-given ability, but he works really hard and very diligent about his process. So seeing that, and then just already the improvement in the quarterback room fires me up. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a lot if the culture in the room's wrong. If the culture in the room isn't that, hey, we catch touchdowns, but the expectation is that we're going to block. And when that culture is right, it happens really quick because they're more than capable typically. The athleticism, the strength, all that stuff's normally there. It's more of a demeanor or a mindset. So when the room is right, I think it happens really quick. I think Jalen is one of the guys we haven't talked about a bunch, but I think he's really settling into his role as a receiver. He's improving on route running. I think his hands are getting better, securing the football. I think he's doing a really nice job. He's shown up quite a bit already.
When you're a team in year 2, offensively, defensively, there's certain liberties that you get to enjoy right in the first 5-6 days of fall camp, because you can carry a larger catalog of defense and offense than we would have, in spring ball, in fall camp a year ago, because our guys understand it, right? They know it. We've been doing it over and over and over again. And really, for these freshmen that are coming in as mid-year enrollees, that's one of the things for me to be able to do with them when our other coaches go on the road recruiting. Grubb and I are sitting here, spending time with them, meeting with them, installing before we ever get to, spring workouts and then spring football. And then, the summertime we go through the installation. And so by the time you get to fall camp, you can do a little bit more. But always, right, it always comes back to the fundamental elements, right? And it's hard to move on schematically if you're not where you need to be fundamentally. And I think that we've certainly taken a jump in that direction in year 2. So, that was one thing that, if you point to some of the areas that we had to improve upon from last year, being able to create negative plays in the backfield, being able to affect the quarterback, certainly from a standpoint of creating more sacks defensively. It was something that we needed to look at. So fundamentally, we tweaked some things, and schematically, just created some more variance in some of the things that we're doing in passing downs. I think we're in a good spot right now. I think, that's an ever-flowing, what does this team do this week? How elusive is their quarterback? How do we want to contain him and also, force pressure and those things? And so, week to week, those things are going to change. But if you build a catalog of defense in the offseason, those are things you can kind of go to week to create variance in what you're doing. So James Harrison would be one that I would want Quay to play like as well. I think Quay is on a team full of freaky people, Quay is the freakiest. He is freaky athletic, and I think he's a special talent in terms of his strength You watch him at the point of attack. When we started talking about violent hands, which is one of our Bama fundamentals that we continue to stress and harp on, Quay's ability to destroy blocks and get off and make plays. There was a play against Auburn. A guy came and, pulled against him. Absolutely obliterated him at the point of attack. Those are things, right, that show up on tape in terms of his strength and physicality. But, ultimately, right, it's about knowing, what I like about Quay is like knowing when to and when not to, from a physical standpoint, be too aggressive. And I think he's learned a lot last year with the experience that he had. And I think he's what I would call, has turned himself into a controlled, aggressive player.
Look forward to more coverage on Coach's Checklist next week, specifically Kalen DeBoer following the first scrimmage that Alabama will have coming up on Saturday at Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium. That's coming up. We will not have a broadcast of the scrimmage, but our first broadcast of the year is coming up next week as we take a look at our upcoming schedule. Wednesday night, 6 p.m., the place to be, Baumhauer's Victory Grill in Tuscaloosa. Of course, on Harper Lee Drive, we look forward to having Chris Stewart host that show once again, as we will have Greg Byrne for sure join us on the very first episode, some other guests from Alabama Athletics as well. In a few weeks, we'll have Kalen DeBoer, of course, leading up to the Florida State game. But Hey Coach is back. It'll be with you all throughout the rest of the school year into the month of April. We look forward to being back at Baumhauer's coming up at 6 p.m. Listen to that across our full radio network and, of course, streaming here on our social media platforms as well. And then we will, of course, be getting ready for Alabama soccer that will be at home next weekend. And then our first sporting event will be the Alabama football game against Florida State coming up on August 30th. But it's just good to see the upcoming schedule back on Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR. Make sure you follow us on all of our social media platforms for the very latest on Alabama athletics. It's going to wrap up this edition of Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR. Huge thank you to our guest, Colin Gay, for joining us from the Tuscaloosa News to get his thoughts on preseason practice for the Crimson Tide. And, of course, we thank Alabama Athletics for the footage we saw of practice, as well as the coordinators, Kane Womack and Ryan Grubb, getting their comments on this football team that is in the first full week of August, really making progress towards the season. Can't wait to hear about how the scrimmage goes on Saturday as we get closer and closer to kickoff between Alabama and Florida State. Thank you so much as well to Ethan Carabin, our producer, put this entire show together. And for all of us at the Crimson Tide Sports Network, this is Roger Hoover saying thank you for watching Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Roll Tide, everyone.